A concept that has me really fascinated right now is the relationship between a person's ego and their creative life. Of course, we can think of a lot of examples of the rock star persona, someone who seems to have a lot of creative talent, but man, is it wrapped up in a whole lot of ego at the same time. You know, people who kind of seem full of themselves, walk around like God's gift to mankind, and oftentimes they get a public response or reception that only further enforces that. But in those cases, I tend to think fame and success are the bigger variables that might inflate a person's persona at that stage. Creativity is another variable, and it's a harder one to isolate. So the creative process for a lot of people is really internal. It's a lot of soul searching, a lot of exploring your own inner world, and yeah, it's just very focused on your own individual subjective experience. Which makes it seem like, doesn't that feed the ego? Isn't that very egocentric? Actually, ego derails creativity like nothing else I've seen. So, no matter what you do, your work is gonna grow from the soil of your own life, your own experiences, your own cultural makeup and background there. It's inevitable, you know? I don't really think there's any true subjectivity for anything human made. But a lot of people see that and forget that creativity is not only about that inner process, but also the process of connection. It's very much both and. Like, what good is a creative piece if it's not connecting with the viewer? You know, the creative process is really a relational one. So whether you're making creative work that's just so self-obsessed, it sounds like you're just bragging and doing nothing else, to just lacking a collaborative spirit and being kind of a pain to work with, there are a number of ways ego derails creativity, and I decided to just go over a few of them. Number one, obsessing over responses to your work as if it revolves around you, as if people revolve around you. Most of us have probably been here at some point, obsessing over things like view counts or likes and engagement or star reviews if you create in something that invites those. We're probably aware that it's a bad habit to be so hung up on those metrics, but social evolution has kind of wired us to be hung up on those metrics. You actually enter the defensive part of your brain, and that part can't do lateral thinking, it can't think outside the box, it's the least creative part of you. The broader reality is that, you know, people are so consumed with their own lives that we never scrutinize other people as much as we think other people scrutinize us, you know? And so, in one sense, that's kind of sad because we aren't getting as much attention as we think we are. On the other hand, it's very relieving to know we're not getting as much attention as we think we are. The things that we think are just going to be super embarrassing, more often than not, don't even go noticed. Again, this is probably why a lot of people hate the sound of their own voice on a recording. Or you probably know somebody who just sees photos of themselves that look totally fine, totally normal, and they're just like, ew, I look wretched. Alright, number two is getting paralysis from a fear of criticism and failure to perform. Comes from a very similar place as that other issue, just worrying too much about what other people think of you. The only difference is when your paralysis part strikes a little earlier, it stops you from even creating anything at all in the first place. Sometimes worrying about how our work will be received leads to that obsessive checking over other people's reactions. Other times it just leads to us sitting on our hands and not doing anything. And I actually think that's the worst case scenario. Think of all the great stuff that could exist in the world that doesn't because people got hung up at that part. The wild thing about this is it can even strike really successful creators. How many people you know, like, put out an awesome album but then are just really afraid to get started on the next one because what if it's a flop after that? And another observation. If you ever pay attention to people on social media in the comments section, which don't, this is bad advice, but if you ever do, and it's too late, and you just notice people who just seem to only hop on for the sake of criticizing, like they'll hop on to really innocuous videos of like, hey, here's my ice cream sundae recipe, you should try, and they're gonna be like, do you not care about diabetes? You know, those types of commenters, and you peek at what they make. More often than not, they're either set to private, which there's nothing wrong with being private, but if you're not willing to dish out what you're not willing to eat what you're serving, apparently, or they just don't make anything at all, which tells me that the world, from their point of view, is just a place where people are constantly critiquing It's a spot where people react primarily through sharp edges and criticism rather than creativity. And so they're both putting up defenses and going on the offense based on that assumption. And as a creative person, you don't want to be there. You know, you can realize that there are people like that in the world, but they're not the people you're looking for. And the other people you're looking for are going to be worth the effort. All right, another thing that happens when ego and creativity get intertwined is you start taking it personally. You know, I might have already mentioned this, I can't remember, but one of my favorite things I've heard lately on the topic of creativity is Ronnie Cheng, the comedian, and how he defines professionalism as not being emotionally ravaged by a subpar performance. You know, he's a comedian, so you can think like your performances vary quite a bit with how you feel after them. Of course, you put a lot of work into your work, you want it to succeed, but nobody bats 1,000 here. You gotta be ready for those off nights and just realize like, okay, you're capable of more, but it didn't happen tonight, and that's okay. And yeah, sometimes you'll get some feedback that's not so helpful. Sometimes you'll just get people who are straight up critical of your performance on a certain night. Listen, anyone playing at the top level of what they do, a comedian, an athlete, is subject to this. And part of being a professional is having a filter for that feedback, knowing which voices actually have something that can help move you forward, actually can point out flaws in your game that you can work on, versus folks who are just criticizing because that's what they do. And listening to them is not going to help you out at all. Do I have any big tips on not taking things too personally? I do, but it's often that this process starts long before the creative work is even made. You know, it's about having your identity rooted in something that goes beyond just your output, your performance, your whatever, and not just hinging everything on your art, no matter how much you like it or how much joy and meaning it brings to you. And of course, not everything is for everybody. So hearing feedback, hearing critique from some person, that person might not even be in your intended audience to begin with. You know, I can think of some of my favorite movies of all time, some really great movies, and certain family members, and if I show that movie to that family member, I don't expect a rave review from them. I expect confusion. And I still love them, and I love that movie, and they aren't a fit. Now, when you are able to put ego aside, even partially, even if you're just able to tamp it down just a bit, the other side of that coin is that you get some great creative work. This is when you're able to tap into vulnerability. This is when you're able to tap into the things that connect you with other people, and that is really fertile ground for incredible works of art. Therein, you draw upon your humanity. And if you really want to challenge yourself, maybe make a piece, make some work that confronts your own ego. Oh man, just like, pull a 8 Mile or whatever, and just tear apart your own insecurities. That's not rookie stuff, but it's an option. Ego can be a really big inhibitor of creativity, but it doesn't have to be that way. All right, peace.